Welcome to my interview with Alan Langer, Professor of Psychology at Harvard University. We talked about the importance of constantly learning new things and constantly perceiving things we're used to from different angles to break with our routine and to keep our minds fresh. We talked about the importance of the question, how can we help ourselves to live fulfilled, happy lives in order to help our kids to live fulfilled, happy lives. Have fun and enjoy our video.
The way we can define happiness is, from my perspective, a matter of an engagement with life where one is living fully and not second-guessing themselves at every moment. Most of the world suffers from inordinate stress, and that obviously is not making them happy. Most of our unhappiness, I think actually all of our unhappiness, directly or indirectly, is a function of our mindlessness. The things we think are true, the tasks we think we have to accomplish and then are unable to, the ways we think we should be looking, being, the number of friends or money or whatever it is we think we should have and we don't have. Part of what keeps us unhappy is our being mindlessly judgmental. Mindfulness, as we study it, is the very simple process of actively noticing new things. It doesn't require meditation, although meditation is fine. Meditation is a tool to lead you to post-meditative mindfulness. This is more immediate in some ways. Not better or worse necessarily, but different. So if you were going to come to the United States from Europe, for the first time, no one would have to teach you how to be mindful. You would simply expect everything to be new, and so you would notice. And that's also a way for you to understand how it's energy begetting all of this active noticing. It feels good. It's exciting. So mindfully noticing new things is the essence of engagement. So when you actively notice, that puts you in the present, makes you sensitive to context and perspective, and basically leaves you feeling fully alive. When you're mindless, by contrast, the past is over-determining the present. You're stuck in a rigid perspective and oblivious to the fact that you're mindless. You know, when you're mindless, you're mindless. You're not there to know you're not there. The consequence of being there, of being mindful versus mindless, is enormous. In close to 40 years of research, what we found is that when we teach people to be mindful in this fashion, they live longer, they're healthier, they're certainly happier, they're more charismatic, they're more trusting of other people, they're less evaluative, they're more creative, their memory improves, they're found to be, as I said, more attractive. In fact, you can imagine, after so many years of research on this, there are very few things, if any, that are not improved by being there. So if you think about it, that when you're mindful, good things are happening to you physically, psychologically. When you're mindful, our research has shown that your mindfulness leaves its imprint on the tasks that you're doing. So you end up producing things that other people prefer, think are better. People find you more interesting. And when you take it all together, it's hard to imagine that one wouldn't want to be mindful all of the time. The instructions for meditation are mindful, but it's an activity that can take many, many different forms. You don't need to sit quietly with your eyes closed and so on. The idea is that if we appreciate that we don't know the things that we thought we knew, our attention will naturally go to it. You don't need to practice it. Mindfulness isn't a practice. It's what follows from an awareness of the ever-changing nature of things. It feels to me that virtually all of the problems in the world, whether they're personal, interpersonal, professional, societal, global, all of these problems are the direct or indirect consequence of our mindlessness. And so it's so easy, basically, to go from being mindful to mindless, which means there are mindful solutions to virtually all the problems that are holding us back as individuals, as a culture, as a global community. So my mission is to try to change that and help everybody, and myself included in that, become much more mindful. You understand that everything is always changing and everything looks different from a different perspective. So the idea of being certain is clearly mindless. If everything is changing, then when you're certain, what you're doing is holding it still. So this active noticing new things, of things that are familiar that you thought you knew well, you come to see that in some sense you don't know them at all. And then it becomes exciting again. Everything old becomes new again. When you're being mindful, you're not evaluative. You come to understand that evaluations are in our heads. They're not in the things that we're evaluating. That if you take any event and you ask yourself, how can it be good? How can it be bad? How can it be neutral? You're going to be able to answer your own questions and come to see that it's goodness, badness, and so on, are ideas that we're imposing on events. So when you do this often enough, you come to realize that whenever there's anything negative, that you're producing it. Our negative emotions are choices that we're making, choices that we have to become aware of, that we're now making in this mindless way, not aware that it's a choice. That right now, people believe if there's something good, I must get it. If it's something bad, I must avoid it. When you recognize that the things you think are good can also be seen as bad, the things you think are bad can also have hidden advantages, then you move from being reactive, I must do it, or not do it, to being responsive. You have choices, I can do it, or I cannot do it. It becomes very, very freeing, and clearly you end up happier. Although we have direct evidence that when we make people more mindful, they live more mindfully even in a short while, they become happier. And why not when unhappiness is a result of our mindlessness? Mindfulness is the open mind. It is the flexible mind. So as you're being mindful, you're being mindful. So the more mindful you are, in some sense, the more enjoyment you're going to get out of it, the more you're going to become aware of the uncertain nature of everything and not be afraid of it. People want certainties because they think that they can have more control over the world, their lives, their worlds, if they hold things still. But you're giving up control because you're holding still what actually is varying. Well, part of the reason that people are hesitant to change is because they think that there are absolutes. There are things to know and know them absolutely, and when you have many of those facts in mind, you become more important in the world, perhaps richer and so on. But it's an illusion that their facts are situated in context. When I lecture on this, I often give an example and I'll say, how much is 1 and 1? And people think, well, what a silly question. 1 and 1 is 2. But no, not even 1 and 1 is absolutely 2. If you add 1 wad of chewing gum to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. You add 1 pile of snow to 1 pile of snow, 1 and 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 1. You add 1 pile of laundry, and you can keep going like this to recognize that it's not the exception. In fact, it may be that 1 plus 1, except in the abstract level, is not 2 as often or more often than it is 2. But you never come to understand this when you learn about the world by taking it in, freezing your understanding, thinking, now I know, so I don't have to pay attention to it any longer. So that if we were to teach people one thing and one thing only, it might be for them to understand the importance of accepting uncertainty. Now, people are hesitant to do that because they make a personal attribution for uncertainty. What I mean by that is, you think you don't know, but it's knowable. Somebody else knows, so therefore you have to pretend, not reveal your ignorance. If instead we made a universal attribution for uncertainty, I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. They can't know because things are always changing and look different from different perspectives, then not knowing is okay. And you can be confident and uncertain. And then the world becomes exciting again. I think that for children to learn how to be mindful, they have to be taught conditionally. Everything you tell them has to be, it could be this, perhaps that, it would seem, rather than it is. So we did a study where people thought they were in a consumer study, and we showed them objects. And we either called the objects by name or we said it could be. So for example, here's a cup, here is a plate, here is a computer, here is a dog's chew toy. Or, here is a cup, here is a plate, here is a computer. This could be a dog's chew toy. Now what happened is we asked people to evaluate these different objects from most to least expensive. As they started to write the experiments, oh no, it should have been from least to most expensive. I don't have any more forms, what am I going to do? And the question we were asking was who would think to use that rubber dog's chew toy as an eraser? And the answer was only people introduced to it conditionally. Because if it is a dog's chew toy, then you don't think that it is anything else. So I don't know if that's clear. If we're introduced to the world in this could-be fashion, if it could be this, it could be other things. I don't freeze the way I understand it. And so we did this also with texts. We would rewrite the text so that rather than saying, here are the 3 reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire, it would say, here are 3 reasons that can explain part of the fall of the Roman Empire. So it becomes much more conditional. And then we test them. We test them on what they actually learned. It turns out that when you learn conditionally, you have the same facts as the people who learn it in an absolute way. Then we ask questions that require creative use of the information that isn't in the text. And when you do that, those who are taught mindfully are much better at generating new understandings. All of the rules that we give children, the teachers give children, parents give children, several of these rules are for the parent or the teacher's satisfaction, to make life easier for them. You know, that if I'm a busy person and I have rules, I might be able to more easily do my work rather than having to deal with the children. And oftentimes I do this through external, extrinsic motivation. Johnny, if you're good, you can watch more television, or you can stay up later, or you can have that chocolate bar, or whatever. And that, I think, is unnecessary. It starts off with the assumption that there are some activities that are fun and other activities that are not fun. For the activities that aren't fun, what we have to do is provide an extrinsic reward so the child will do it. This may be rebellious, but I still think that it's important for people to recognize that, in some sense, rules are made by rulers. Rules are made by people. They're not handed down from the heavens, except for perhaps if you believe the 10 Commandments. But in everyday interaction, the rules that we impose were rules that could have just as easily been stated in other ways. Rules were at one point decisions. Right? Somebody decides we need a rule. Decisions are necessarily uncertain, because if there's no uncertainty, there's no decision to make. So if you think about that, then you say, well, wait a second, this rule could be different from the way it was stated. It can be amended, should be amended when circumstances change. Decisions are made at time one by people who have certain biases and perspectives, and then are used as if they are absolutes for a very long time. To be mindful, we want to be rule-guided, not governed. We don't want to obey a rule as if it has an absolute truth behind it. because doing so is mindless. And when we're mindless, we're not using the information in the current situation. We're not able to take advantage of opportunities because we don't notice them. And when we're mindful, we can avoid dangers not yet arisen. When we deal with the world in terms of these absolutes, here's the way to do it, we give up our individual ways that might be better than the prescribed way. When we follow these rules in an absolute way, we don't even enjoy what we're doing. We're more or less going through the motion rather than creating the way to be. It doesn't mean that rules don't serve a purpose, but again, I think what we should do is let them guide what we do. And when they don't make any sense to us, we need to question them. We have to be taught at the beginning that there are many ways of arriving at any particular goal. The way people are taught, and if you're taught a sport, you're taught this is the way you hold the tennis racket, this is the way you hold the golf club or the baseball bat, and it's kind of silly to follow that rule mindlessly because your hand may be twice the size, much larger or smaller than somebody else's hand, your whole body type very different from one person to the next. And what you want to do is say, well, you hold it sort of like this, and then you amend it based on your own physical nature. But people don't do that. People, when they're first learning a sport, learning to drive, learning to do anything, there's a tendency to take in the rules in an absolute way. This is the way you do it. And then they continue that throughout rather than recognize that you need to perform optimally. You need to bend the rules to fit yourself. So I had gone many years ago, to a tennis camp, and the instructor didn't like the way I was serving, and that was fine. He taught me how to serve. I reverted back to the way I preferred to serve. But anyway, after that tennis camp, I went home and I watched the US Open, and lo and behold, none of the pros were serving right. And the point being, if you want to excel, the only way you're going to excel is to learn to do it in the way that best fits who you are and what your individual skills are. When people are teaching children or adults for that matter how to do something, they have a sense they're going to teach them the basics. Right? So you should learn the basics mindlessly. You're supposed to learn them until they become second nature so you could move on in the task to the things that are more difficult. Two parts of that are terribly wrong from my perspective. The first, when you say the basics, who decided that these are the basics? And so if we go back to the sports arena and we have somebody who is 5'2" learning a sport, the same sport as somebody 6'3", I doubt that they should do anything in exactly the same way. So the basics, so-called basics, we have to realize were a decision that somebody made. Again, not handed down from the heavens. The second thing, when we instruct people, children or adults, to keep doing it over and over and over again until it becomes second nature, that's equivalent to saying do it over and over again until you can do it mindlessly. Now, if you're doing it mindlessly, you're not there. Right? And if you're not there, you can't take advantage of all the subtle changes that are occurring. So what happens is that, or in place of that, what we want to do is learn whatever task in a more conditional way. Possibly this way, it could be that way, you might want to consider this other version, and so on, rather than here's a single way that you must follow. And then stay tuned in so that we can make changes based on changes in the environment. You know, if you were playing baseball, you don't want to hit that ball the same way each time you get a pitch. There's going to be an instance where the second baseman sneezes, for example, and that would be a good time to hit the ball to second base, even though you typically hit it to center field or whatever. You know, the point is that when we learn the basics so well that we don't have to pay attention to them, we're giving up all sorts of opportunities. Mindfulness is, in a sense, self-motivating. You don't need motivation to be mindful, because when you're at play, do you need to be motivated to play? Of course not. But play relies on being mindful. Humor. You know, that if you consider a joke you might have heard, that what makes a joke funny, I think, is that you thought it was going in one direction and all of a sudden you say, oh, that's what it meant, and then it gives rise to laughter and awareness that this thing can be understood in many different ways. People mistakenly think of mindfulness as difficult, and I think meditation in some sense helps that mistaken notion along indirectly, unintentionally, by seeing it as a practice, something you must do. Must says, this is not something that would be rewarding in and of itself. So you must do it, so eventually you'll feel good. When there are more direct ways to feel good right from the start. People tend to confuse mindfulness with thinking. And even thinking has gotten a bad rap. Thinking is fun. What's not fun is worrying that you're not thinking the right way, that you're not going to get the right answer. That's what makes thinking stressful and hard. So that when you recognize that mindfulness is energy begetting, it's what you're doing when you're laughing, when you're at leisure. When you're having fun, you're not doing things exactly the same way, so you can tune out. You tune in and are engaged, which is the essence of, or the result of, this mindful noticing. So as soon as you eliminate the mistaken assumption that it's hard, it's self-motivating. Children are almost by nature mindful because everything is new to them, everything is fun. We go ahead. I have grandchildren, and they were here last week, and I watched them. You don't need to buy them toys. They open the cabinets, they take a piece of cardboard, they're throwing things around, playing forever with a wooden spoon. Everything is exciting. What often happens is that we take this natural mindfulness that children exhibit, and then we burden them with all of these rules and these absolutes. And basically, that's what schools do, is teach them to be mindless. Schools teach you that 1 and 1 is 2. They don't teach you that 1 and 1 could be 2, but 1 and 1 could also be 1. They don't, as in 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum equals 1 wad of chewing gum. And you imagine, if we go to school now, and you imagine that if a teacher says, okay, class, how much is 1 and 1? And let's say Johnny or Janie raise their hand and they say 1. What's going to happen? The teacher will tell them they're wrong. The teacher will treat them overtly or implicitly as if they're stupid. The other students pick that up, and basically that sets this person up for a lifetime of misery. If the teacher recognized, which is what I would teach teachers, teach parents, so that they can bring up healthy, mindful children, is that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. So when Johnny or Janie says 1 plus 1 is 1, the mindful teacher will say, how did you come to that? And then they'll explain 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum equals 1 wad, and everybody will have learned something. So what happens is that if we recognize that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, we end up teaching people to have more respect for each other. We end up teaching people that virtually all evaluations are mindless. Now, right now, if I said to you, do you want to meet my friend Sue? She's very impulsive. I said, no, why do I want to meet her? But in alternative, if I said, do you want to meet my friend Sue? She's very spontaneous. Yeah, well, spontaneous is impulsive. You dislike somebody because they're gullible, but gullible is trusting. You like somebody because they're flexible, but flexible is wishy-washy. You don't like somebody because they're rigid. But rigid is stable, someone you can count on. And it just goes on and on. That all of the ways we understand people could be recast, if we were more mindful, in a more positive way. Now, the world that I live in, that we want these children to live in, is a world where they're liking everybody. And I like you because I see you as trustworthy, not trusting, rather than gullible, and I see you as spontaneous rather than impulsive, and so on and so forth. I behave to you nicely. You like being treated nicely. You treat me nicer, in a nicer way, and life just becomes much more pleasant for everyone. If I see myself in this positive light, what happens is I stand tall. I'm not afraid to explore new things. I'm going to be more likely to be innovative. And so here I am, happier. All this mindfulness is making me healthier. And this mindfulness leaves its imprint on the things we actually do, so I'm going to be more successful. And when you add it all up, it's very hard for me to understand why anybody who is taught any of this, becomes aware of any of this, wouldn't be mindful virtually all the time. Activities are neither fun or not fun. Evaluation, again, is in our heads. Anything can be made fun. So, for example, I was visiting a friend who lived on the 33rd floor of this very tall apartment building. And it was a very fancy apartment building. So they still had an elevator operator, which, of course, we don't need. You just go in and you press a button. But it seems classier to have a person who's going to bring you to the floor. And it seems like a job that would be deadly dull, right? I mean, all day long just going up and down an elevator. But what I saw him do was to make it a game. So he asked me what floor I wanted to go to. I said 33. He then looked at the board. He turned around and then, without looking, tried to get me to 33. And only glanced once when we were at 28. So to see if he could figure it out. He made it a game. Anything can be a game. So what we did was a study where we had people were going to be either doing what they saw as work or the exact same thing that was presented to them as play. And interestingly, we used something that should have been playful to start. It was evaluating how funny cartoons were. But we did it in the context of work, again, or play. And what happened is that when this was presented to people as work, they hated it. They wanted to be paid more to do it. Their minds wandered. It was just generally unpleasant. When the exact same task was presented as play, people had enjoyed it. And people have experience with this, that doing your own dishes after a meal is often seen as a chore. But if you're at somebody's house and you want to be helpful, so you do the dishes in their house for them, all of a sudden it's fine. It's Tom Sawyer and the Fence. I don't know if you read Tom Sawyer, but Tom Sawyer had fooled his friends into painting the fence that he was supposed to paint. And it seemed as if he had the upper hand, but in fact, they were having a good time painting the fence, and so he lost out. And the bottom line is very, very simple, that we can make anything fun. And we can make it fun for our children by teaching them that there's a way to do it so that it's fun. And then if we do that, if everything is fun, then it's less important to provide extrinsic rewards. Now, what happens is the reverse of parents now trying to keep children in line with extrinsic rewards. What I think is more the so-called problem is getting children off of their gadgets, their smartphones, for instance, and so that they'll spend some time with their parents. And it's the reverse sort of problem. Excuse me. And here, what we have is parents expecting that they should follow the rule. This is family time. So stop enjoying yourself and pay attention to me, your mother or your father. And I think that the parents have it wrong again in this instance. It's my belief that nobody would prefer to be emailing or playing a game when they could have a nurturing, exciting, loving, fun conversation with somebody right there. And if that's true, then the answer is parents have to up their game. Just make what kids shouldn't have to be with you because you say, be with me. They should want to be with you because being with you is rewarding. So that whether we're trying to get children to pay attention to us or to leave us alone, the answer is basically the same, is to recognize that the activities we want to teach people to do are activities that can be enjoyed. We want to teach people that to have these, to feel a passion for something is very simple. It simply requires us noticing new things about the activity. Now, we did this fun thing where we took activities that people didn't like. Not that everybody doesn't like them, but we looked at the people who didn't like paintings, rap music, classical music, football. And a lot of women in particular don't like football. And we had one group just do the activity, watch the football game, listen to the music. We had another group notice one new thing about each of these activities, for each of the activities. We had another group notice 3 new things. We had another group notice 6 new things. And it was very simple. The more you notice, the more you like the thing you noticed. Now, a lot of people wait for the world to draw them in and wait for something exciting. And this work and all of the work on mindfulness says that it's very easy to become excited and engaged. All you need to do is notice new things. Notice new things without fear of evaluation, fear that you're doing it wrong. That means whenever you're saying, this is, you should say, this could be. When you say, this is how you do it, you should say, this is one way to do it, and so on. So they start to see that things are not single-minded, that things are open for interpretation and to be done in various ways. When we have very high standards, we act as if those high standards would be seen as high across time by all people. For example, people might not realize that Impressionist paintings that people pay millions of dollars for were first rejected in their day. And so you want to say, who developed these standards? Perhaps there's another way of doing it to meet other needs. So we have to open up our whole way of being where we have single goals to multiple goals, single ways of doing things to multiple ways of doing things, single answers to questions to multiple answers. And with that, then, more people are brought into the whole process. The way to take a task that is unpleasant, that is scary to do, and make it pleasant is several. There are several things that you can do. The first thing is to recognize that it's rarely the case that any one thing we're doing, even if we do it terribly, is necessarily going to destroy our lives. It's just this one thing. I can do it differently, better, the next time. All right. What we need to do is to recognize, so when you recognize that it doesn't matter nearly as much as you're worrying about it. I say to people all the time, you want to ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? You have people who coach business gurus who say what we should do is have work-life balance. Now, work-life balance is better than work-life imbalance, for sure. But what we should do is have work-life integration. We should be basically the same people when we're at work, when we're at home, when we see ourselves at play. But we don't do that because of our mindlessness. And so what we need to do is take those things from our most fun activities and feel that way, bring that attitude, those behaviors to school, to our work settings. then we lead the integrated happy life. William James, who I have enormous respect for the things that he wrote, I think there's one thing that I disagree with. When he had said that for children, that life consists of a booming, buzzing confusion. Now, if you think that children start off with all this confusion, then it might seem that what we should do is give them a lot of rules, so that they can organize all of this information and make it less confusing. And I think that what we want to do with children is not give them absolute rules. You know, if you were going to organize your books, there are several ways you could organize them. So you could organize them by size so that they look a certain way. And when you walk into your house, you could organize them alphabetically. You could organize them by topic. You could organize them by author. You could organize them by how much you enjoyed reading them or how much you look forward to reading them. You could organize them by cost. You could organize them by, and so on and so forth. Each of these are potential organizations. So what you want to do, let's say if you were going to organize your books, you could have a rule. I'm going to organize them by author. But you need also to have an awareness that there are multiple organizations, so that if somebody else organizes them differently, you don't see them as disorganized. You don't put down the person for doing it differently. So when teachers and parents want to have children deal with all of this new information and give them categories, that's fine. But they need to understand that that's just one way of reducing the confusion, that it can be done in many ways. And that way you reduce all sorts of prejudice. So right now, if you have children who may be taught if you gave them, well, let's say we take 20 children, and we say divide into natural groups, whatever that means. They may divide in based on male and female. Okay, and that's fine. If they divide based on male and female, and then you give them a sport to play, and they have the in-group versus the out-group, and all sorts of prejudices result. Let's say instead of that, you had them divide into groups by gender. Then you had them divide into groups by whether they wore eyeglasses or not. Then you had them divide into groups based on their hair color. Then you had them divide into groups based on their height. Then you had them divide into groups based on the subjects that they liked the best in school, and so on. And then you said, well, who's on your team? The answer from the child would be, it depends. And you don't get a clear in-group, out-group. And you never know if the person that you're speaking to is going to be somebody who's going to be on your team for whatever the next activity in life. And so you tend not to disparage them because you may actually need them. We want to teach our children to be non-evaluative. We want to teach them this by showing them that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. So when they call Johnny by some negative name, we want to have them generate how that might actually be positive. So if you say Johnny is rigid, you can help the child come to see that that rigid means he's stable, someone you can count on. Okay? So if they're less evaluative, they're going to be happier. We want to teach them that the joy in activity is in mastering, not having mastered, so that the process is all that matters. So if something goes wrong, it says nothing about them. It's simply a cue to do it differently. So you say to the child very directly that it's not wrong because it's not nice only to call Johnny by the name you just called him, but rather it's silly because this can be understood differently. So every time the child is either called or calls somebody by some pejorative name, every time they're evaluative, you ask them how that might be a good thing. and you'll learn yourself. And you'll come to say that, gee, rigid is consistent, that spontaneous is impulsive, and so on. So you're going to teach them not to be evaluative. You're going to teach them to not to see things in a single-minded way. There's a whole different a set of experiments that we've done on mindfulness that I think may be worth describing so people have a sense of just how important this concept is. It's not just that we're making people more creative and happier, more engaged, which by itself is certainly good enough, but we have many, many health studies. One health study that started, it was the first test of our ideas of mind-body unity. Very simple. That right now people tend to think you have a mind, you have a body, and then the question is, how do you get from one to the other? We say, let's put them back together. Then wherever you're putting the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. So we have a host of studies where we put the mind in a healthy place. The first of these, we took elderly men to a retreat that had been retrofitted to 20 years earlier and had them live as if it was 20 years earlier. They spoke about past events as if they were just unfolding right now. They were surrounded by icons, magazines, and so on from the past. So by putting their mind in that earlier space, what happened when we took measures from the body? Well, it turned out that their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory improved, their strength improved, and we took photographs of them before and after. They looked noticeably younger. And so that was done in 1979 was when we first conceived of the study. More recently, not most recently, we have a study with chambermaids. It's kind of fun, where we take these chambermaids, they're exercising all day long, cleaning rooms in the hotels, right? The first thing we asked them was, how much exercise do you get? Surprisingly, even though they're working, their work is exercise, they don't realize that, so they don't think they're getting exercise, because they think exercise, based on the Surgeon General in the United States, is what you do after work. Well, they're too tired after work to do anything. So they don't see themselves as getting exercise. Now, what happens if we teach them that work is exercise? So we change their minds to see that what they're doing all day long is exercise. What effect will that have when we take measures on their body? Well, what happened? So we took these chambermaids. We gave them many tests before we started this. Half of them we taught their work was exercise. Making a bed was like working on this machine at the gym and so on. So at the end of a 10-minute discussion, they know their work is exercise, and we don't do that for the comparison group. So we came back, I don't remember if it was a month or 3 months later, but we took a bunch of measures. The first thing we said was, are you working any harder? No. Are you eating any differently? No. We asked the boss, is she working any harder? No. So we're reasonably sure from all the ways we could assess it that they were doing nothing different. All that differed was now they saw their work as exercise. What we found was they lost weight, there was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down, simply from the change in mindset. So we have a host of studies on health where we do one of two things. We either follow this mind-body counterclockwise sort of study where we put the mind someplace to make people healthier, or we have the teaching people noticing new things to make the mind more mindful and help the body. So the most recent of the former counterclockwise sort of study was a study we completed on diabetes. We had people who have type 2 diabetes show up for the experiment, and we took all sorts of measures. Then we had them play computer games. Now, they were supposed to switch the game that they were playing every 15 minutes or so. And that was important because the most important part of the study was we had a clock by the computer that was rigged. So for a third of the people, the clock was going twice as fast as real. For a third of the people, it was going half as fast as real. And for people, it was going real time. So by switching what they were doing, they noticed the time. Some people thought the time, everybody thought it was 15 minutes, but for some it was actually a half hour. For some, it hadn't even begun. Okay, do you understand? So by having their minds believe time was one thing, the question that motivated the study was, would blood sugar level follow real or perceived time? And the answer was perceived time, which suggests control that we can exert over diseases such as diabetes. So let's consider pain. People who are in pain think they're in pain all the time. Nobody is anything all the time to equal measure. Sometimes it hurts a slight bit more, sometimes it hurts a slight bit less, sometimes it doesn't hurt. But we don't notice that because we have the mindset that says it hurts, so we only notice when it hurts. So what we do is we contact these people at random times throughout the day to find out, does it hurt? Does it hurt more or less than it hurt before? And by bringing people's attention to the changes, they can gather some control over the pain. So we ask them, if it hurts more or less, why? And then you do a search for what you're doing and how it might be different to why it might hurt more or less. And over time, we find that, let's say with people who have arthritis, that they're able to experience far less pain. So again, whether it's regards to our health, our happiness, that by mindfully noticing all of these changes, by noticing new things, we end up in a general way, when we made people more mindful in several nursing homes at the start of all of this, just noticing new things results in longer life. When you have diseases, that recognizing that those diseases are not staying still, that they're changing, and that there's a way that we can understand more about them and control more of it ourselves, we end up healthier. The act of this simple noticing new things it's exciting. It's the essence of what we do, and we're having the most fun. So it feels good, it's good for us, the products we produce turn out to bear the imprint of it. When I'm mindful, people find me more attractive. It's a win-win-win-win situation. There are several things. A little bit of a problem is that if they're steeped in their own mindlessness, feeling that there are all sorts of rules, and if they're not the perfect parent, they're not going to be, their children are going to be in jeopardy, then we can deal with the parents' problems separately. But if the parent were interested in bringing up a happy, healthy, mindful child, there are 2 or 3 things that they could do that would certainly improve life for this child. And then we can talk about other things that would almost guarantee it. The first, I think, would be to teach the child that facts are conditional statements, that things can be other than they seem, that everything you do can be made into a game. Evaluation is in our heads, it's not in what exists in the outside world. They can be taught, should be taught everything in this conditional way. You could do it this way, or you could do it that way. Why don't you find a way that works best for you right now, but know that what works best for you right now, tomorrow, may not be the best way, so you want to try it all over again. By realizing that life doesn't typically rise or fall on any one action, it's okay to make a mistake. And you have to realize, little Johnny or Janie, that it's mastering that's fun, not having mastered. You know, it's the process. It can't all work out, because if it all works out, it's dull. So I would teach the child something that the child has already mastered and show them that, gee, when they were first learning it, it was great fun, and now they barely bother with it. An example is a child in an elevator. When a child is too small to hit the buttons and they struggle and they can't do it, and it's great fun. But then once they're taller, It's no longer fun, and I don't know any adults who find pressing buttons in elevators fun. So the point is that they need to know that the little bit of struggle, the I didn't do it quite right, let me do it differently, doesn't speak to who they are, it doesn't speak to their intelligence. It just means find a different way. And then it becomes exciting. You're going to teach them that everything can be fun. How do you teach a child that everything can be fun? You show them that it's fun. If he breaks his toy and he starts to cry, pick up the toy, if you can afford it, and break it more. Isn't that fun? Okay, now let's see if we can put it back together. Or let's take the individual parts and how can we do something fun with the individual parts? Everything can be fun. But the parent who's going to be most successful, I think, is the parent who has to learn these lessons, him or herself, and to let go of some of their stress and their rigidity. Now, stress is mindless. Many people, I think, mistakenly believe that stress is a natural part of living. I don't think so. It's a mindless part of living. Stress depends on two things. It depends on the belief that something is going to happen and that when it happens, it's going to be awful. You can question both of those. People think they can predict, but most of the times you can't. So if you're afraid that you're going to be fired, or you're afraid that your spouse is going to leave, or you're afraid that you're going to fail at something, if you ask yourself, how might I not? How might this be wrong? You give yourself 3 reasons why you won't be fired. Yeah, I've been at the company for so long, they might value me. Yeah, they're aware of my commitment. They value my values. We have many friends in common. Whatever you think would be persuasive. So you've just changed from thinking for sure you're going to be fired to maybe you'll be fired, maybe not. You're immediately less stressed. The next thing, let's assume you are fired. What are the advantages of that? And if you can come up with the advantages are now I'll have more fun and more time to spend with friends, family, hobbies, my children. Now I'll be able to, I have the motivation to find a job where there's a better fit. Going to work where you don't feel valued is a terrible way to live your life, so you'll be out of that awful situation. So, what is a summary of that? First, you went from this terrible thing this thing is going to happen, and when it does, it's going to be terrible. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen, and when it happens, there are going to be advantages to it, and the stress just falls away. Now, there are some people who argue that what kids need to learn is when they're doing something, if they give up, not to see themselves as stupid, but rather to try harder. And I think that that's not bad advice, but you don't have to encourage children to play games. They just play them and they love them. So rather than tell them to try this awful thing, try harder at it, thing they see as awful, make it into a game. Lots of parents do this now with foods. You can reward something, if you're into giving children rewards, with chocolate, or you can just as easily give them raisins. It has nothing to do with the food itself, really. It has to do with the whole interaction, the way you're telling them, boy, I'm with you, I really care about you, and this was fun, wasn't it? People have, I think, mistaken notions even about television. They say children shouldn't be allowed to watch particular shows and so on. And I think that sometimes it might be better to watch the show with them and have a very extreme reaction so that they get the message. Oh, did you see how he hit him? Oh, I can't believe he's using a gun. So the child learns. They're learning opportunities. So the point is that everything out there can provide a lesson for our children. Parents worry that they're not going to do the right thing for their children. They're going to let them watch too much TV, eat too much chocolate, not get enough exercise. The list of potential worries is endless. I think that if they recognize that any activity can be made into fun by making it more mindful, then all of these problems become resolved. That if a child is eating and is mindfully eating, they're not going to overeat. You know, there's research, old research, that if you give children a smorgasbord and let them eat whatever they want, they're going to pick out healthy foods, unless you've already trained them to use food as a way to comfort themselves because they're stressed. If you are worried that children are going to watch too much TV, TV isn't good, it's not bad. Like everything else, it depends on the way you watch it. So if you make televiewing a mindful experience, let them watch TV. People think that they have to read more than they watch TV, but there's a way of reading mindlessly. So it doesn't matter so much what you do, it's the way you do it, and over that, parents have much more control than they might now realize. So we said, recognize that you don't want just successes. It becomes like the Midas touch. You think you want everything you touch to turn to gold, but you wouldn't be able to eat because your fruit would now be gold. We don't want what we think we want. That the little stumbling along the way is actually good for us, as long as we don't talk about it to ourselves in the wrong way and think, oh my goodness, the world is going to fall apart. What we want to teach children, and we want to make sure we remember this ourselves, is that we should take what we do seriously, but we shouldn't take ourselves so seriously. We also want to teach children that compliments and awards and things of this nature, they're nice, but they also shouldn't be taken too seriously. And we want to teach the child in our own way. The child's not going to understand this if said in this fashion, but you want to not take the compliment so you're not vulnerable to the insult. You want to recognize that the people who gave you the compliment gave it to you for many different reasons, some that are because of what feels good for themselves, having nothing to do with us, that if you varied the criteria slightly, somebody else might have gotten the compliment or the award. You don't want to say, these people know and can recognize my genius, because if they change their mind, then you're in trouble. So what we want to do is know that all positives and negatives are, if we fix on them, that we're being mindless, that anything that's positive could have also been negative. Anything that's negative could have also been positive. What we want to do is to be an experiencing self rather than a self that is dependent on other people telling us that it's good or bad. Everything could be taught in such a way that it becomes exciting, that it stays exciting, that it's challenging for children. All we have to do is teach it conditionally and remove the mindless evaluation that we impose on most things. So the bottom line to all of this is that whether we're thinking of how to raise healthy children, how to be healthier and happier ourselves, the answer is right there in front of us. That if we let go of all the mindless ideas we have and embrace this notion of uncertainty, exploit the power in uncertainty, actively notice new things, we're going to find we're more engaged in everything we do. That engagement, that mindful noticing, is going to make us healthier and happier. Our children are going to see that we're healthier and happier. When we instruct our children in how to be, we're going to communicate to them this more flexible, multiple model, easier way of being. There are many ways of achieving success. There are many ways of doing anything. And that we eliminate the notion of evaluation. We teach them to actively notice new things, that everything can be enjoyed. And then the time together will be that much greater than it currently is.